Hello and welcome to the world's most contentious issue in the cruising world, and that is anchoring and anchors. I am going to throw a cat among the pigeons and try and describe how to anchor effectively, efficiently, in 6 easy steps. On our vlog recently we've been anchoring around the Anambas, and the Anambas are quite deep waters, and we anchored in the capital, Tarempa, in some pretty rubbish anchoring conditions. And it prompted a couple of questions from people. First one came from Yves Lemoine, who says, would love it if you could do a how to anchor video including tying the snubber, setting and retrieving. It has to be my most stressful thing as a newbie cruiser. I know practice solves all woes, but with your experience it would be great to see how you guys have broken the task down. And then there's another comment from I don't know if that's the correct way of pronouncing your name. Could you guys do a mini video on how you tie your snubber on your anchor? Well, to answer the question first, we've actually done that. On episode 68, Liz breaks down how she ties the rolling hitch on our anchor chain. We'll talk a bit more about snubbers in a bit, but I want to go back to Eve's comment about it being very stressful. I think one of the best ways to combat stressful anchoring situations is obviously to have confidence. And in my mind, that confidence doesn't begin as you're dropping the anchor, it comes way before that. And that brings me on to the first point, and that is having confidence in your ground tackle. Ground tackle by definition is your anchor, your chain, your connector between the anchor and the chain, your bow roller and your windlass. So starting from the deck down, make sure that you service your windlass, because believe me, if you've ended up like us with a broken windlass, there is nothing worse than having to weigh 60 meters of chain by hand in the blazing sun. It's horrible. Keep inspecting your chain, keep an eye on it, make sure it's not rusting too much. It will rust a little bit invariably, obviously, but if it's in that kind of state, try and get it regalvanized. And swap the chain over once every 2 or 3 years or so, just end to end it, take it off the anchor and just swap it over. The next bit, of course, is the connection from the chain to the anchor, and this is another controversial one: swivels. We have a swivel between our chain and our anchor, and it has served us well. Not all swivels are created equally. Some are better than others. So if you are going to have a swivel, and they do work, and there are good ones out there, do your research. And then finally, the world's most controversial topic is anchors themselves. In the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen what we call new generation anchors. They're new designed anchors. They're originally based on the Bugle, the German Bugle with a roll bar, and there's quite a few different variations out there. As I say, we have the Rockner, but there are plenty of others that are really good. And I think the problem comes from people that are still using old school anchors that have never used a new one. And it's a bit like saying, well, why do I need to change my 20-year-old laptop when I can still send email from it? Well, a new laptop can do it probably more efficiently and quicker. And in the same way, new generations can set quicker and they hold better. I know, because we started with a plough, a CQR, for 2 years. We dragged a few times. It takes a long time to set, and it didn't really give us 100% confidence. The day we put the Rockner on, our lives changed. So please, if you've got the money for it, if you have the budget, and in my opinion, the anchor is possibly the single most important piece of equipment on your boat that's going to give you peace of mind, it is worth spending the money on. So please do have a look at that. So that's your ground tackle. Once you have confidence in your ground tackle, you are now ready to tackle the anchoring itself. But before we even get there, there's the next step, which for me is doing your research. And this can be broken down into 2 sections: the research of the location you're going to be anchoring in and the research of the weather. So the location. There's a plethora of information out there on anchorages, on locations, on countries, and they normally come in the form of pilot books. We have met a few cruisers who proudly boast that they do not buy pilot books. And whilst I understand the logic of wanting to go to a new place and discover your own places, your own anchorages, and not to end up where everyone else is anchoring, I get that, I do get that. But to write off pilot books altogether, I think, is a little naive. Pilot books are very well researched and well written, and they provide a lot of information, not even just on the anchorage itself, but the surrounding areas, on the history, the culture of the places that you're visiting. And they really are worth the money. Don't photocopy them. You know, people put a lot of time and effort into these, so it is worth owning your own pilot book. course, with the internet age, there's lots of blogs out there. Lots of people have written blogs on certain anchorages. Don't stick rigidly to them. Don't try and anchor where they have put the anchor coordinate, because you know that every other man and his dog is going to be anchoring at that spot. Use it as a guide. Collate as much information as possible. Get to know the anchorage before you've even been there. Get familiar with it. Understand the lay of the land. Know where that church is on the hill, or the cafe on the beach, or there's an outcrop here, or maybe there's an underwater coral bommy at the entrance. Familiarise with yourself with all these objects and these sites before you've even got to the anchorage, and that will hold you in good stead and give you a little bit more confidence when you do eventually approach the anchorage. The other area that's worth researching, as I said, was weather. Look at the weather, not just your 5-day forecast, but look at localized weather, perhaps more importantly localized weather. See what happens. And the two areas of localized weather that I would really give some time to researching are afternoon sea breezes and squalls. With an afternoon sea breeze, invariably you'll end up pointing out to sea with your back end pointing to land, being blown onto land. So just be aware of that and know how strong those sea breezes can pick up, and also more importantly what kind of fetch that creates. Squalls, where we are right now, we get a lot of westerly squalls that come through from Sumatra. They can blow pretty strong, and they normally come around in the afternoon, evening time. So we try to anchor defensively by understanding what possible scenarios you're going to end up with weather-wise. The fetch is probably the one thing that is going to upset your anchor more than anything else. We've sat pretty in 80 plus knots before now in an anchorage without the anchor budging, and that's because the sea state was relatively flat. But if you're in a situation where the fetch builds up, you're going to end up doing this. The boat's going to be rocking backwards and forwards, and it's that is likely to drag your anchor. That, and also the swaying of the boat in very strong winds. You might find if you've got a lot of windage on the boat that you'll sway from side to side. That could also disrupt it. But really, I'd just be careful of that fetch. That's the one thing that you really want to keep an eye on. So you've done all your preliminary research, you know what to expect. So now we approach the anchorage itself. Don't be afraid to scope it out. There's nothing wrong with coming into an anchorage and doing a little circuit, maybe a couple of circuits. Just cruise around, going among the boats, not getting too close of course. Just see how everyone is lying, just get really familiar with the lay of the land, and also to try and find a good spot. Avoid anchoring too close to other boats. There's absolutely no need for it, especially in a big anchorage. There really is no need for it. It's a bugbear of mine. Those that have watched our videos know that I hate anchoring too close to other boats. This has actually come down from experience. We have been in situations where people have anchored too close, the wind's picked up, or their anchor is dragged, and they are shitty situations to have to deal with. So there's no point in putting yourself in those situations. The other reason for giving us lots of space is that I like to shower in the afternoon on the back of the boat, and you do not want to get a face full of my arse. As you're scoping around, if you can see the seabed, keep an eye on it. If you can find a sandy patch, do. Try to avoid weed, rocks and coral. Once you've found your spot, we are now ready to drop the anchor, and this is the tricky bit. It's not really tricky at all, it's pretty straightforward. So the first thing you want to do is to work out in which way the boat is pointing in relation to the wind or the tide, whichever is strongest, and you want your nose into that. If you're not sure, there's two ways you can work this out. You can look at other boats to see where everyone else is pointing, or drop something in the water that will float and see which way it moves. And you want to be pointing into the wind or into the tide. The idea really is to know where you want the anchor to lie and where you want the boat to lie. Obviously they're going to be in two different spots. So this is where the whole timing technique comes in. If there's two of you, useful to have someone on the bow. That person on the bow can do two things. The first is if you've got in clear waters, you can actually see the anchor go down and you can see where it lands. The second thing is they can count the chain, because what you want to do is to lower the anchor down, and as it hits the seabed, you want to put the boat into a stern. As you're putting the boat into stern, you're paying out the chain, but you don't want to go into stern too quickly. If you go too quickly or too soon, all that's going to happen is you're going to have a chain at this kind of angle, and it's just going to pull the anchor along and it'll be difficult to set. If you go too slowly, or you drop it you put the boat to a stern too late, you're going to end up with a whole load of chain over your anchor, which you also want to avoid because that chain could wrap around the anchor. So it really is a careful balancing act. What we tend to do is nowadays is Liz will stand at the bow and she will put her arm up when we are approaching the length of chain, or when the anchor is about to hit the water. So basically, if we're in 10 meters, as that 10-meter marker is coming over the bow, Liz will put her arm up and I'll know when to start putting the boat into a stern. Some people release the capstan and just let the chain run freely with the weight. We tend to use the button with the motor so that we pay it out more slowly. As that anchor's hit the seabed, the boat's going to start going into a stern, and you pay out your first 30 meters if you're in 10 meters of water. 3-to-1 scope, I'll come on to that in a minute, but we'll put out 30 meters to start with. As you put out 30 meters, the person on the bow will stop paying out the chain, but you keep the boat going in a stern. Again, not too quickly, just fast enough so that it pulls the chain and eventually pulls it taut. And this is where the person on the bow can come in useful. They can actually stand there and indicate what the chain's doing, so they can raise their arm to show you when that chain is taut. And when it's like that, ease off on the throttle or put it into neutral, and what should happen is the anchor will bite, and you'll know when it bites because the boat will line up in line with the anchor and the chain. And the second thing is that you might feel a sudden sort of lurch forwards, and that is when you know the anchor has initially bitten. If the anchor's dragging, the person on the bow will be able to tell you because they'll see the chain will be doing this, and you may even hear the anchor dragging as well. But when you're happy that it's bitten, put the boat back into a stern, and again, not too much, but just enough so that you pull that chain taut, and you should be able to let your hands off the wheel and keep it in a stern, and it should hold it there. Now, I mentioned 3-to-1, and in 10 meters of water that we'd put out 30 meters initially. We tend to put out more than that. So once we've got the chain set and we're happy that the anchor is bitten, then we'll put out some additional chain as well. So we might put out another 20. So we end up 5-to-1 scope. And this time try and find a transit. And this is where you find an object on the boat, like a stanchion or a shroud, and you line it up with something ashore that isn't going to move. It could be a tree or it could be a building. Line those two up, stay in one position on the boat, and all things being equal, your transit should stay roughly in line. Of course, that will change if the tide changes or the wind picks up. I should mention that different anchors will require different anchoring techniques. With our CQR, we took a long while to get that to set, and we would end up having to put the motor into quite high revs. With the Rockner, it's the opposite. If you put the boat in too many revs astern, you are likely to rip your windlass off the bow because that thing bites so quickly. So again, it's just a balancing act, and you'll get a feel of when to ease off on the throttle, or indeed how many revs to give your boat into a stern to make sure that it is set. The theory though is that you can put your boat into full revs astern and you won't drag. Okay, so now we're ready to put the snubber on. The idea of the snubber is to take the strain off the roller itself. There's a couple of ways of doing this. For many years we used a 3/8 stainless steel hook, which we would hook over one of the links and just pay out excess snubber as we paid out more chain. You'd then tie off the snubber, and then you would continue to put chain out. So the chain ends up looping, it comes over the bow and it ends up looping like this as the snubber takes the strain. There's a couple of issues with using a hook. It's nice and easy to install, but they can come off quite easily, especially in rough weather. And this is why we have switched over to the rolling hitch method. It's a bit more involved, but we feel a lot safer with it. Now, I mentioned earlier, Liz has done a whole piece on this. So if you go to episode 68, I'll put a link up here now and also in the description. This will show you how Liz ties the rolling hitch onto the chain. So to conclude then, make sure you've got good ground tackle. Your confidence in anchoring begins with that ground tackle. So make sure that you've invested in it wisely and that you service it regularly. Do your research. Check out the lay of the land beforehand, and also check out weather systems and weather patterns, especially localized weather. Go into the anchorage already knowing it in your mind's eye what it looks like, and pick a clear spot and try and avoid anchoring as close to other people as possible. The more space between you and your neighbour, the more comfortable both of you are going to be. And take your time actually anchoring itself. It's not a rush, and if you're not happy with the anchor, or you end up lying too close to someone else, or you don't quite feel that it's bitten right, weigh anchor, do it again. There's nothing wrong with that. Use your transits once you've set the anchor, and also monitor the boat. So once you've set the anchor, you can then use an app or use your chart plotter and put it on track so that you actually track where the boat goes. You'll expect it over a period of hours to seemingly move erratically. That will happen. And over 12 hours you'll get a clear idea of the general movement of the boat. It's also worth mentioning a Facebook user group that Liz and I are members of called Anchors and Anchoring. It's run by a guy called Andy Marsh. Just look up Anchors and Anchoring, and it's a very useful forum, a very friendly forum where they discuss different anchoring techniques, different anchors. They'll post up articles and tests that have been done. Very useful, especially if you're new to anchoring. So I hope that gives you a few pointers. No doubt there's people watching this who have their own techniques, so interested to know what you think. Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button if you like this video, and the subscribe button if you haven't already subscribed. Peace and fair winds.